Michael Strange, welcome to ASPI.
Thank you, Graeme.
What will the new changed intelligence community that Australia has, what would it look like?
There'll be remarkable similarities with the existing arrangements, in the sense that we're not recommending any fundamental change to the structure of the agencies as they currently exist. Where it will differ will be in relation to how we perceive the intelligence community. Historically, it's been conceived as a core of 6 agencies. We actually envisage it as a grouping of 10, which includes parts of the intelligence parts of AFP, of immigration, of AUSTRAC, and of the Criminal Intelligence Commission. We think these actually need to be seen as a coherent part, along with ASIO, ASIS, and ONA and the others. So the construct will be broader, and the centre will be stronger, in the sense that the Office of National Intelligence, we hope, will give this greater integration, greater joined-up capability, greater coherence, but building on and not doing away with the federated structure that we've inherited. So there will be important areas of continuity, but I think in relation to the broadened concept of the community and the stronger centre, they will be important changes.
Can you say that Australia really does have a capital C intelligence community, or on a bad day, is it still a set of individual intelligence states operating in an intelligence federation?
It was Justice Hope 40 years ago that first talked about an Australian intelligence community, and in his first report back in the 1970s, he said that this was an aspiration rather than a reality. I think the same is true today, even though there are important areas in which it has made significant advances in being better linked up. And I'm thinking here particularly of counter-terrorism, of people smuggling, of support to Australian Defence Force operations overseas, and increasingly in relation to cyber security. I think in these areas there have been important elements of genuine community. But there's a whole raft of areas where I think the concept of community is not apparent, particularly in relation to how priorities are set and how they're accounted for, how resources are allocated, how the workforce is recruited and retained, how data is shared, how ICT connectivity is established. I think in all of these areas there are elements of siloing and stovepiping that we need to actually transform into something that actually reflects more common interests.
Haven't they been blowing up silos in this town for the last 20 years?
Well, as I say, in some aspects they certainly have, and I think the report spells out those areas very strongly.
But not enough explosive under some of those silos?
Maybe I'd use a different analogy, but we need more of it, and we need it to address what are becoming very pressing issues. These issues of data sharing, of actually recruiting an intelligence workforce, these are becoming quite difficult issues, especially for smaller agencies. It needs a whole of community approach to it. We've made it very clear, Graeme, in this review that the intelligence community we have today is not broken. It has a strong record of achievement. Our intelligence agencies have some cutting-edge capabilities. They have staff of high professionalism and dedication. They are well aware of their responsibilities under the law and their accountability. They've got very strong international partnerships, particularly with the Five Eyes community. I mean, these are enormous national assets. What we're saying is we need to make a good operation better. And we can do that, we believe, by actually making it more integrated and joined up and building on its strengths. And I think there's all kinds of advantages in that, and that we need to pursue that fairly single-mindedly.
If it is a community, it's a bit like the community in the bar scene from Star Wars. I mean, it's cops and it's spooks and it's spies and it's lawyers and it's analysts and it's cyber nerds and it's diplomats. That's a lot of people at the bar.
It's a rich tapestry, and each have their own perspectives, each have their own accountabilities, each have their own priorities. But if they operate in their own worlds, we are going to underperform. And although our agencies may be high class, our community will not be world class. And that's where we need to be, because the challenges we're facing are linked up. Our responses have to be linked up. So the old demarcations between domestic and foreign, between collection and assessment, those walls have broken down. I think there are elements of the distinctions that remain important, but there are also aspects in which we need to recognise the new realities that technology change and globalisation have created. And that's where I think a stronger centre can actually be a hugely advantageous development for Australia.
You make the point that unlike the other Five Eyes community, unlike the United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia hasn't gone down this centralised coordination road. But if Australia is doing so well, does that difference suggest some strengths in the system, not a weakness of coordination?
Yeah, look, I think that's absolutely true. We need to relate whatever we recommend, whatever we do, to Australian circumstances. We're not a mirror image or an outrider of anybody else. And I think that was Justice Hope's, very strong nationalist view when it came to intelligence matters, and it's one that I strongly share. But having said that, we aren't that good that we can't afford to learn from others. And I think we need to take the best of these developments and adapt them to our own circumstances. I think it's burying our head in the sand to say that everyone else is going down a direction that actually is not one that is good for us. The United States, of course, was confronted in a fundamental way by the realities of 9/11. The British were similarly confronted by the outrages in 2005 and subsequent ones. And I think that really galvanised both of those countries to a view that in looking at the security challenges they faced in a compartmentalised way was no longer good enough. And you had to retain the strengths of the individual cultures and the individual agencies and their perspectives, but you had to link them up more effectively. Now, I know the argument is made, and we say this quite explicitly in the review. We heard the argument that Australia is different. It's smaller. It can operate less formally. It doesn't need these centralising devices. We don't agree with that.
You don't think Canberra is a country town anymore?
We don't agree with that. We think that passed in policy terms a fair while ago. So we think there is a logic to the argument that the security challenges we face are changing on us very rapidly. We have got very capable agencies, but we need to be ahead of the curve. We can't simply say we're good and we're different to everybody else, because we're all facing the same kinds of challenges. So it's not just following the leader or following someone else, it's actually recognising the realities we face. Now, we also make it very clear in the review that we did not come at the outset of this review with a preordained idea that somehow structural change was necessary. In fact, we were of the opposite point of view. But we were convinced, the longer we looked at this, the more we talked to people, that as strong as the agencies are, the impact in terms of the national interest is not as great as it could be, and that the recommendations we've made in relation to structure, resourcing and legislation really are designed to build those synergies in ways that consolidate the existing structures rather than supplant them.
These weapons, though, of coordination and of money, in the real world of day-to-day Canberra, does it mean that an agency is going to be much more under the pump of saying the Prime Minister wants this, the Cabinet's after this, the Intelligence Czar is saying to you, we want this? There's a lot of pressures to get with the group and get with the strength.
Yeah, and I think those pressures need to be resisted. And let me explain what I mean by that. Independence of the intelligence community, particularly intelligence assessments, needs to be maintained from the demands of policy priorities. This was the foundation of the Hope Royal Commissions. Every inquiry, every commission into the intelligence agencies since has reaffirmed this importance, that intelligence assessments need to be independent of policy pressures and policy priorities. And that is true, and we certainly reinforce that. But we've also made the point that intelligence doesn't operate as an end in itself. It is related to the needs of the government of the day and to the national interest more generally. So in terms of the timeliness of intelligence input, it needs to be there. In terms of relevance to policy making, it needs to be there. It needs to draw out for policymakers the implications of intelligence assessments. It needs to undertake what's called opportunity analysis to draw out the costs and risks of particular policy options. Now, I don't think any of that is compromising the independence of intelligence assessment. It is making it more relevant to the policy requirements of the government of the day. Now, it may well be that the product that is produced is inconsistent with policy priorities. It may well be that the intelligence agencies say, we simply cannot reach a conclusion because the evidence is inconsistent or it's incomplete or it's contradictory.
That's a very tough thing to say to a minister.
It is.
We're not going to give you what you want. We're not going to give you something that enables you to say this is the policy.
I think that's why why you need an independent intelligence agency like an ONI that can actually speak that truth to power.
And how often, in your experience in this town, do people say, no, Minister, we can't give you that?
It's not. I mean, I have seen that many times. I mean, and it is often doesn't make you friends, but nonetheless, I think it's a very important requirement for an intelligence agency to be able to say, we have not got enough information, or the target is too opaque, or the flow of intelligence is simply not there to justify us reaching a conclusion. Now, it may also reach a conclusion which is at odds with government policy, which is equally discomforting. But nonetheless, I think that is a necessary part of the input of intelligence to policy making. And I don't think you need to have, for stronger coordination, you don't need to have a lowest common denominator. You can have a view, often not desired by ministers, where you do have agencies saying, we are seeing this in different ways. And that is where a Director General of an Office of National Intelligence can actually try and reconcile those if he can. Now, none of this is easy, but I don't think more coordination means a lowest common denominator. In fact, it should mean the opposite. And I think that agencies need to be honest and need to reflect the perspectives that they derive from their own particular vantage points, looking at the evidence as they see it. So
this is the art of mixing puzzles and mysteries,
exactly.
Which is not a set of lines that most ministers want to hear.
No, they don't, because we cited this as Gregory Treverton's work, and there are some puzzles which can be solved if you get the right pieces of the jigsaw. There are mysteries which don't lend themselves to easy resolution, and of course, it's the mysteries that governments find frustrating because and this is where I think it comes back to unrealistic expectations of intelligence. Intelligence cannot predict the future, but it can provide a context and it can reduce uncertainty. But there are real limits, and I think one of the aims of our review is to actually drive home, particularly to government, that these limits are real, that there is value-adding input of high significance, but intelligence does not always provide the key to the door, and that ultimately decisions sometimes need to be made for other reasons, and intelligence alone won't actually be able to predict the future. Now, I think the last thing in the world you would want is for the independence of intelligence assessment to be beholden to the requirements of policy. That would, I think, demean the currency of intelligence. It would degrade its credibility. And it needs to remain independent. But as I say, it's not an end to itself. It needs to be related to the exigencies of policy making. So I think our review reinforces the Hope argument in relation to independence, but also edges it forward to say that in terms of making it relevant to policy, it's very important that happens, because it's a very significant public investment.
And that's really, I think, one of the things you really focus on is that this is now a $2 billion enterprise. This is a rich enterprise, and it's going to get richer. And your line that the intelligence community now needs to be managed as an enterprise, a big enterprise. So in some senses, less conceptualised as a community, more as a big enterprise?
Both, I think. I mean, it needs to be conceptualised as an enterprise, partly because, as you say, of its size, but also because of its purposes. It is facing challenges, the Australian national interests are facing challenges that require it to be more linked up, that require it to be an enterprise. Otherwise, the investment is not going to deliver its best return for the Australian national interest. So it's not just size and investment, that is important, but it's also purposes. And as I say, I think this is the way of the future. I'm sure it's the way of the future. And the question is how far we and how quickly we embrace it. And we're doing it not because other countries are doing it, countries with which we compare ourselves. We're recommending it because we think it's right.
Michael L'Estrange, thank you very much.
Thank you, Graeme.